1998. A full six-man Spetsnaz GRU team was dispatched deep beneath the Kola Peninsula to clear out a top-secret bunker that had been sealed off by the Soviets for 45 years. We all assumed it was just a routine cleanup mission, until we descended hundreds of meters underground and our flashlights swept across the corridor. That's when we saw the walls writhing. What the 1954 batch of Soviet scientists had tried to bury under 15,000 tons of concrete wasn't dead. It was climbing upward. I remember that autumn of 1998 clearly. The order came through on an encrypted teletype at 3 in the morning, right to the base. Our squad was conducting routine winter adaptation training at the training grounds outside Murmansk. The lieutenant was suddenly called to the comms room. When he came back, his face was grim. He gathered the 5 of us into the tent, zipped all the waterproof tarps shut, and set a red headlamp on the table, its beam cutting through the dark. "Boys," the lieutenant said, his voice low, his eyes like marbles in the red light. "I'll only say this once. We've received a cleanup mission directly from the main intelligence directorate. This isn't a drill. It's real. Clean mission. In Russian, we called it a chistka. It was one of the standard task types for GRU Spetsnaz, sending a team into a sensitive location to erase all traces that might leak state secrets. Documents, equipment, even personnel. But usually, such missions came with a clear operational code name and detailed intelligence briefs. That night, the folder the lieutenant spread open was almost entirely blank. The target is an abandoned military facility on the Kola Peninsula, designated Koltsovo 12 Bunker, the lieutenant said, tapping a finger on an unmarked spot on the map. Construction began in 1949, sealed in 1953. No one has entered it in 45 years. The night before departure, I couldn't sleep. In my 6 years with the GRU, I'd executed sweeps in Chechnya, infiltrated the Tajik border, and even entered the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Pripyat with the team in 1995. But no mission had ever left me with this inexplicable restlessness on the eve of action. It was an instinct, like knowing there was a cliff ahead, but the fog was so thick you couldn't see the edge. At 4 in the morning the next day, the 6 of us boarded a Mi-8 helicopter. We flew north from Murmansk for about 2 hours, then landed in a barren expanse deep in the Kola Peninsula. It was October, and snow was already falling. Under a gray sky stretched endless frozen tundra, dotted with a few twisted birches, bent into gnarled shapes by the polar wind. The helicopter dropped us off and flew away. The lieutenant led us on a 3-kilometer trek across a scree field and 2 dry riverbeds, finally stopping at a depression that looked like an abandoned quarry. "This is it," the lieutenant said, glancing at his GPS. I took in the scene. If no one had told me, I would never have guessed anything special was here. A pile of weathered granite rubble, a few clumps of yellowed moss, and a half-buried steel beam jutting from the debris, likely trash left by some 1950s survey team. But when I climbed to the top of the rubble slope and looked down, I gasped. Below the rubble was a massive vertical shaft, about 20 meters in diameter. The walls were reinforced concrete, but years of geological movement and freeze-thaw cycles had left them riddled with cracks, some wide enough to fit a fist. The mouth of the shaft was sealed by a huge circular steel plate, rusted and pitted, but still bearing faded red warning signs and a radiation symbol. The Kola drilling survey team cut through this plate last week with a diamond saw, the lieutenant said, pointing to a rectangular opening about 2 meters square in the center of the steel. They lowered a probe down. The signal died at 200 meters, so we know nothing about what's inside this facility. Our sniper and point man, Andrei, had already rigged the rope system with practiced efficiency. He was always the fastest. Andrei was a Siberian, a man of few words, but he possessed a chilling ability. He could sense threats in total darkness by instinct alone. What happened later proved that this skill saved our lives, but it also pushed him to the brink of madness. At exactly 0900 hours, we began descending along the ropes. I was the 3rd one down. When I hung at the very center of the shaft, feet dangling in empty space, connected to the ground only by a single rope, I glanced downward. My night vision goggles transformed the depths of the shaft into a green void, bottomless, devoid of any reference point, only the vertical concrete walls stretching beyond the limits of my vision before dissolving into darkness. The feeling was strange. Not the fear of heights, but an illusion of being sucked in by something, as if the hole had its own gravity, actively pulling you down. The deeper we went, the more pronounced the change in air became. By October, the surface temperature on the Kola Peninsula hovered near freezing, but inside the shaft, the air was warming. After descending about 100 meters, my thermometer showed the ambient temperature had climbed to 15 degrees Celsius. At 200 meters, it reached 22 degrees. At the same time, the humidity surged sharply. My exhaled breath formed green clouds of mist in the night vision. More significant was the smell. It was something I had never encountered before, difficult to articulate with precision. It vaguely resembled rotting mushrooms, mixed with the dampness of a basement, but beneath those familiar notes lurked a stranger, sickly sweet odor. That sweetness reminded me of coagulated blood on a battlefield, yet it was more intense, more acrid, as if some living thing were breathing. Around the 300-meter mark, the shaft wall beneath my feet suddenly vanished. The shaft opened into an expanded space, like the ceiling of a vast underground hall. My night vision swept across the area, revealing a staggering sight. The hall was at least 30 meters high, its vaulted roof carved directly into granite, unlined by concrete, exposing the raw texture of rock strata. On the floor of the hall, rows of large, rusted equipment stood in orderly formation. I hovered on the rope for a few seconds, sweeping my tactical flashlight around. Those machines looked like some kind of pump station or generator set, massive in size, bizarre in shape, bearing the heavy industrial design style of the late 1940s and early 1950s. Extensive rivet structures, thick cast iron casings, handwheel valves. Everything was completely frozen with rust. The floor was covered in a thick layer of black substance, resembling a decades-old accumulation of dust and mold. When I released the rope about 2 meters above the ground, the soles of my boots met an unsettlingly soft surface upon landing. The entire floor was coated in something that felt like humus, at least 10 centimeters thick. As I stepped down, my ankles sank completely into it. Andre had arrived 2 minutes before me. He had already conducted a quick reconnaissance of the hall's 4 corners, reporting simply that the area was clear, with 4 corridors leading out in the north, south, east, and west directions. The lieutenant unfolded the yellowed structural diagram, shining a red flashlight on it to locate our current position. "This is equipment level 1, code B1, the lieutenant said, his finger tracing the lines on the drawing. According to the blueprints, this facility has 5 levels from top to bottom: equipment level, storage level, living level, laboratory level, and the lowest, the main control room. The height difference between each level is about 150 meters. The passage to the next level should be at the end of the east corridor, where there's a freight elevator shaft. But the elevator's definitely out of commission. We'll have to climb down via the emergency stairs." Sasha and Igor were tasked with guarding the forward base we established on B1, where we stored the ropes and extra supplies, which we called the temporary support point. The lieutenant, Andre, our medic Sergei, and I advanced along the east corridor deeper into the facility. The corridor was about 3 meters wide and 2.5 meters high, enough for 2 people to walk side by side. The walls were assembled from prefabricated concrete panels, with transverse reinforcement ribs spaced every 5 meters or so. A row of fluorescent light tubes hung from the ceiling, all completely dead. Some, corroded by age, had fallen from their brackets, dangling in midair like stalactites. I walked second in the line, keeping my breathing as low as possible, straining my ears to catch any sound beyond our own footsteps. But there was nothing. No rats, no water, no wind, not even the sound of a single drip. The silence here was unnatural. Any underground space sealed for decades would have some characteristic soundscape. The groan of structural settling, the faint whistle of air currents, the metallic ping of distant equipment expanding and contracting with temperature changes. But this facility was utterly dead. I could even hear the pulse of blood in my own temples. We moved along the corridor for about 70 meters before we spotted the emergency entrance to the next level at a corner. It was a blast door of unbelievable heft, embedded in the concrete wall at the end of the hallway. The door itself looked like a solid chunk of cast iron, at least half a meter thick, its surface crusted with rust. The rubber sealing gaskets around the frame had completely hardened and carbonized. A single touch crumbled them into dust. The lieutenant and I spent nearly 10 minutes prying the door open just a crack with a crowbar. The moment it gave way, a current of air rushed through the gap, hotter and more humid than the air in B1. That draft carried an even stronger sweet, rancid scent, along with another, more subtle odor I couldn't identify at the time. Later, I would recognize it as the smell of protein decay. Andre was the first to sense something wrong. He stood by the gap, suddenly raising his fist to signal the entire team to halt. In GRU standard tactical hand signals, that gesture meant the highest level of alert, an immediate threat detected. I dropped into a crouch instantly, my rifle muzzle trained toward the door crack. But Andre wasn't pointing at the gap. His gun was aimed at the corridor's corner, the exact spot we had just come from. The weak green glow reflected off his night vision goggles, but his body posture was rigid. "Lieutenant," Andre said, his voice barely audible, "do you hear something?" The lieutenant frowned, listened for a few seconds, then shook his head. "It's not a sound," Andre said. His voice carried something I'd never heard from him before. Fear. This man, who had hunted bears alone on the Siberian tundra, now had fear in his voice. "It's the whole corridor." "What do you mean?" the lieutenant asked. "The corridor is moving," Andre said. "The walls are moving." Instinctively, I glanced at the wall behind me. My night vision device rendered everything in varying shades of green, and combined with the absolute darkness of the hallway, visual precision was severely compromised. But when I switched my tactical flashlight to focus beam and shone it on the wall, I finally saw what Andre was talking about. The concrete walls were covered in a black substance I had initially mistaken for mold. But under the intense light, I saw its true nature. It wasn't mold. It wasn't dust. It was an incredibly fine layer of black fibers. Each fiber was as thin as a strand of hair, densely intertwined, forming a black velvet blanket that coated the entire wall. And it was moving. Not the kind of movement caused by wind, the air was still. It was moving on its own. Every fiber writhed with a minuscule, almost imperceptible undulation, like the tentacles of some creature testing the air. When my flashlight beam hit them, the fibers near the spot recoiled sharply, as if burned. But beyond the beam's edge, more fibers slowly extended toward the light source. I took an involuntary step back. The soles of my combat boots pressed down on the black fibers covering the floor, producing a faint rustle. Then I saw it. Where I had stepped, the fibers were rising one by one, curling around my boot soles. "Get out of here," the lieutenant said, his voice sharp and final, leaving no room for argument. "Everyone, back toward the blast door. Move." We retreated down the corridor quickly, but the fibers seemed to react even faster. As my tactical flashlight swept across the walls during our movement, I saw the entire corridor's walls undulating in waves, as if the wall itself had become a vast black skin with muscles writhing beneath. The visual impact was overwhelming. It hit me so hard that I felt a wave of physical dizziness. The four of us practically crashed through the blast door. The lieutenant and Andre heaved it shut while I spun the locking handwheel as fast as I could. The moment the door sealed completely, I heard a sound from the corridor outside. A soft, pattering noise, like countless tiny insects striking the iron door. Then everything fell back into dead silence. We spent several minutes gasping for breath on the other side of the blast door. This side was a transition room about 10 square meters, connected to a spiral staircase descending downward. The stairs were steel-framed, heavily corroded on the surface, but structurally they still seemed capable of bearing weight. Sergei was the first to speak, checking his M4 carbine's ammunition as he asked in a voice striving for steadiness, "What was that?" No one answered him. The lieutenant leaned against the wall, his expression complex. I could see him making a decision, whether to continue descending or retreat. As squad commander, he had to weigh the mission objective against the team's safety. The problem was, our encounter so far couldn't form a standard sitrep. If you wrote in an operations report that microorganisms on the walls are hostile, Command would send you straight to psychiatric evaluation. Eventually, the lieutenant made his call. He opened his radio, contacted Sasha and Igor on B1 level, briefed them on our situation, and ordered them to hold position and maintain vigilance. Then he glanced at us and said only one sentence. Mission continues. Reach the main control room, complete the lockdown, then extract. From now on, everyone maintains visual contact with at least 2 others. No solo actions. We began descending that spiral staircase. From B1 equipment level to B2 storage level, the vertical distance was roughly 150 meters. The stairs coiled down a narrow circular shaft, each loop dropping about 10 meters with 15 turns total. The stair width allowed only one person, so we moved in single file, Andre leading, me right behind him, then Sergei and the lieutenant bringing up the rear. That descent felt interminably long. With each loop, the air's temperature and humidity increased. When we'd covered about half the distance, the thermometer showed ambient temperature had reached 35 degrees Celsius, with humidity near 95%. This was standard tropical rainforest conditions, but 600 meters beneath the Kola Peninsula, such temperature and humidity were utterly anomalous. My combat suit was completely soaked. Breathing became difficult. Sweat streamed into my eyes from my forehead, and in the green glow of my night vision, everything was veiled in a blurry halo. What unsettled me more was the change on the walls. The stairwell walls were originally bare granite, but as we descended, I noticed a slick, translucent substance appearing on the rock surface, like some kind of biological secretion. When my glove accidentally brushed against the wall, that substance stretched into a thin, long filament across the glove surface, its viscosity and elasticity reminiscent of slime mold. Andre stopped abruptly. His reaction was lightning fast, left fist raised, while dropping to one knee, lowering his body's profile to minimal exposure. The 3 of us behind immediately mirrored the same tactical posture, our breathing compressed to near silence. In the deafening stillness that swelled in my eardrums, I heard a sound from below the stairs. It was a rhythmic thudding. Thump, 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 thump. Each impact came about 2 seconds apart, dull and regular, like a colossal heartbeat. The sound traveled through rock and steel structure, and I could feel the iron steps beneath me vibrating faintly with each strike. It wasn't the noise of machinery. No man-made machine would produce such a sound. It was too biological, too organic in texture. The thudding continued for about half a minute, then stopped without warning. Immediately after, we heard a new sound. A sliding noise, the sound of something heavy and massive being dragged across rock floor, punctuated by occasional impacts and scrapes. That thing was moving. Though we couldn't see it, all 4 of us knew that somewhere in the darkness of the levels below, a living, enormous entity was shifting position. Andre glanced back at the lieutenant, who made 2 gestures. Continue forward, maintain silence. We shut down all radios, switching to hand signal communication. This was standard GRU Special Forces procedure. In situations with unknown threats, radio silence is the first rule of survival. The next level of stairs, I moved almost centimeter by centimeter. Finally, after 3 more turns, the entrance to B2 storage level appeared below us. It was a concrete doorway similar to B1's, but the blast door on it was only half closed, leaving a gap of about 40 centimeters. From that gap seeped a faint, pulsing, blue-green light. That underground glow remains the clearest and most haunting image in my memory. A blue-green light, faint but undeniably present. It had no clear source, radiating evenly from every surface of B2, as if the space itself was glowing. The texture of that light was uncanny, somewhere between fluorescence and phosphorescence, the color of a deep-sea fish's luminous organ, cold and alien, carrying an instinctive repulsion that made you recoil. Andre pressed himself against the edge of the door crack, dimming his night vision scope, peering through the gap with one eye. He held that position for nearly a minute, motionless. Then he slowly pulled back, his face ashen. In a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "It's full in there." The lieutenant shot him a questioning look. Andre swallowed hard, then spoke a few words even quieter, words that still send a chill through me when I think of them today. "Those fibers, the black ones from the B1 corridor. B2 is covered in them everywhere. The entire storage level is blanketed. He paused, then delivered the most chilling detail. They've grown into the shape of trees. We spent about 3 minutes, the four of us taking turns peering through the crack to assess B2, then hammered out a plan. Cut across the edge of B2 as fast as possible, disturb nothing, and head straight for the entrance to B3. When it was my turn to look, my first thought was, this can't be a man-made military installation. It looked like a subterranean ecosystem sealed off for millions of years. The ceiling of B2 was far higher than I'd expected, at least 20 meters, and the floor area was roughly the size of a football field. In that vast underground space, the black fibers had shed their B1 corridor form of wall-hugging velvet carpets. Here, they'd grown into shapes beyond belief. Clusters of black columnar structures thrust up from the ground, some as thick as a barrel, others as thin as a human arm, ranging from a meter or two to nearly 10 meters in height. These columns were coated in dense, elongated fibers, each one slowly writhing, stretching, curling like countless black tentacles. At the tips of those black columns bloomed clumps of blue-green luminescent tissue, irregular in shape, their edges like torn wounds or translucent, fleshy petals. The blue-green glow we'd seen earlier emanated from these tissues. The light wasn't steady. It pulsed in a regular rhythm. Bright, dim, bright, dim, perfectly matching the frequency of the thudding sounds we'd heard before. The air in B2 was thick with a buzzing that made your scalp crawl. An extremely low frequency, below the threshold of direct human hearing, but when it was strong enough, you felt it in your gut. Crouching by the door crack, I could clearly feel my stomach cramping slightly, and my tooth enamel felt like it was being scraped with steel wool. That was the physical effect of infrasound on the body. Then I saw it. At the center of B2, where the black columns were densest, the ground had a massive, irregular crack. The concrete around the crack's edges had been pried up from below by some force, revealing a dark hole about 10 meters in diameter. Around the rim of that hole lay a full ring of black columns, slumped over the ground like some enormous beast crouching to drink from the abyss. And deep inside that black hole, something was shifting. I couldn't see its full form, just a part of it. A vast expanse of smooth, moist, pallid surface, slowly dragging through the darkness underground. That surface bore irregular dark patches, arranged like the texture of diseased skin. It moved at an agonizingly slow pace, but every inch of movement came with that heavy, grinding sound of something being dragged across the ground. The lieutenant tapped my shoulder. My observation time was up. We'd assessed B2. It was passable, but we had to hug the right wall tightly, staying as far from the central black hole and whatever was inside it as possible. If anything triggered a change, the team would abort the crossing immediately, retreat to B1, and call for a helicopter extraction. On paper, that plan seemed reasonable and feasible, but when we actually executed it on the ground, there was nothing reasonable about it at all. Andre took point, I was second, with Sergei and the lieutenant bringing up the rear. Though Sergei was a medic, his rifle marksmanship ranked in the top 3 of the entire company. We called him the Death with bandages behind his back. The 4 of us spread out at 3-meter intervals, pressing our bodies flush against the right wall of B2, crouched low, moving forward with the lightest steps we could manage. The moment I set foot on the floor of B2, I realized the situation was far worse than what I'd glimpsed through the crack in the door. The substance covering the ground, I don't know how to describe it. It looked like a layer of soil woven from mycelial threads. Stepping on it felt like a cross between thick sponge and semi-set glue. Each step required extra effort to pull my boot free, accompanied by an unsettling, sucking sound. Every single squelch was like a stone dropped into a still pond, impossibly clear in the dead silence. After about 20 meters, my worst fear came true. Those black columnar structures began to shift their orientation. They moved so slowly, so imperceptibly slow that you're naked I could barely track the motion. But in the green field of my night vision, I could see the cumulative result. The glowing tissue at the tops of those columns began to tilt, uniformly and in unison, toward our position. In the mingled green and cyan light, the dozens of massive black columns in the center of B2, with their pulsing, luminous crowns, looked like a row of slowly turning heads. They were sensing us. Andre gave me a hand signal, accelerate the crossing. We quickened our pace simultaneously, no longer bothering to muffle our footsteps, and began a jog along the narrow wall on the right. As our speed increased, the response from those black columns became more pronounced. It wasn't just the tops rotating now. The entire columns were bending toward us. The curvature stretched the surface fibers taut, and some snapped under the strain, each break releasing a faint, twanging sound. The low-frequency hum in the air intensified. My stomach cramped worse than before. Now it wasn't just my stomach. My diaphragm was affected too. Every breath felt like the muscle was resisting my brain's commands. These were the classic symptoms of infrasound resonating with internal organs. On the battlefield, Special Forces demolitionists trained for this. I knew that when the source was large enough and the frequency low enough, infrasound could rupture a person's organs from the inside. But the thing in the black pit beneath us hadn't yet unleashed its full power. It was still just sensing. We reached the far end of B2. The entrance to B3, like B1, was a heavy blast door, but this one was sealed shut, fitted with a rusted mechanical lock. Andre crouched in front of it, pulled lock-picking tools from his vest, and began an emergency bypass. I, the lieutenant, and Sergei formed a semicircular defensive formation with our backs to him, 3 muzzles pointed at 3 different directions of threat. The lock-picking took 4.5 minutes. Those 4.5 minutes were the longest 270 seconds of my life. During that wait, we watched helplessly as the black columns in the center of B2 completed their reorientation. Dozens of glowing tips all aimed directly at us. And the thing in the pit changed too. That vast, pale, moist surface rose higher, revealing more of its body structure. I saw textures resembling primitive muscle tissue, layered and overlapping across the massive form, illuminated in the sickly, pallid white of the bioluminescent cyan light. Then the thing made a sound. It didn't come from a mouth. I'm not sure it had one. The sound seemed to originate from cavity resonance deep within its massive body. It was a low, drawn-out noise like wind passing through a canyon, but there was something in it I couldn't explain. Something that made me feel it was a kind of language. It had rhythm, it had inflection, repeating the same sequence. I can't reproduce that sound for you. A human throat can't produce that frequency. But at that moment, I had only one thought. It was calling out. In response to that call, the entire array of black columns in B2 began to pulse rhythmically. Their glowing tissue flickered in sync with the colossal sound. The blue-green light of the underground space and flowed in waves, like neural signals conducting through the body of some immense creature. The lock finally sprang open. The blast door was wrenched aside, and Andre charged in first, the 3 of us close behind, before hauling the door shut from the inside as fast as possible. Sergei pulled a tube of quick-dry expanding foam sealant from his pack and sprayed a ring along the door's edge, standard equipment we carried for sealing isolation doors. The foam swelled and hardened on contact with air, forming a temporary airtight barrier. With the door closed, most of the noise from outside was muffled, but that low-frequency vibration still seeped through the half-meter-thick cast-iron slab, like some massive beast breathing slowly just beyond it. We sat in the airlock, no one speaking, for green faces in the night vision goggles, each wearing an expression I'd never seen on GRU Special Forces soldiers before. Not fear could be controlled. This was something deeper, the recognition of one's own insignificance. We'd fought ambushes in the Chechen mountains, trudged through the ruins of Chernobyl in hazmat suits, but those threats were known, something the human mind could grasp. What lay beyond that door was outside our frame of reference. The silence lasted about 3 minutes. Then Sergei spoke, his voice steady, too steady, unnaturally so. "Lieutenant, I need to confirm something. Go ahead. After we descended, can we still raise Sasha and Igor on the radio from B1? The lieutenant tried the radio and shook his head. Past B2, the solid granite and double-reinforced concrete above had completely blocked the signal. From here on, we were cut off from the surface entirely. And if I get wounded, Sergei pressed, or if I crack, what then? The lieutenant looked at him, not answering immediately. For a commander, this was the hardest kind of decision. Leading your men into a dead-end trap with no way out, and they trusted you. After the mission is complete, Everyone can fall apart, the lieutenant said at last, his voice low and firm. But not now. Right now, you're still in tactical mode. B3 was the habitation level. According to the yellowed blueprints, this was the largest floor in the entire facility, housing living quarters, a mess hall, a medical bay, and a small command post. If we could reach that command post, the map indicated a direct emergency passage to the B5 main control room. On the staircase down to B3, we felt the shift. The temperature dropped from the 35 degrees of B2 to about 20 degrees Celsius, and the humidity fell too. The sweet, cloying odor in the air faded, replaced by something stale, dry, dust, and old paper that made us even more uneasy. Every level of this facility defied expectations. B2 had been an anomalous ecosystem teeming with biological activity. You'd assume things only got denser the deeper you went. But at B3, everything suddenly became normal. Horrifyingly normal. When we pushed open the blast door to B3, we saw a clean, orderly corridor. The walls were lined with beige glazed tiles, still intact after half a century, though a few had cracked from structural stress. Fluorescent lights ran in neat rows along the ceiling. Not the broken, dead tubes of B1. These were intact, just coated in a thick layer of dust. The floor was covered in green rubber sheeting, typical Soviet public building style from the 50s, now hardened and cracked but overall remarkably preserved. Rooms lined both sides of the corridor, their wooden doors painted pale green, each bearing a sign. I shone my flashlight on the nearest one, dormitory number 2, capacity 8. Andre pushed the door open and we filed in. The dormitory was about 40 square meters, with 4 iron bunk beds lined against the walls, 8 bunks total. The bedding was neatly made. Army green blankets folded into crisp rectangles, white sheets pulled taut without a single wrinkle. On the nightstands sat enamel cups, toothbrushes, and some completely desiccated personal items. A political propaganda poster from 1953 was tacked to the wall, featuring Stalin's portrait and a slogan, "For the victory of the communist cause." This wasn't an abandoned facility. This was a facility that had been evacuated in a hurry. All personal belongings were in their proper places. The bed was made neatly, with no signs of mess or disorder. This indicated that whoever lived here had left without taking a single personal item, without even disturbing anything. They had evacuated suddenly under some emergency order and never returned. "Lieutenant, look at this." Andre pulled a yellowed notebook from the drawer of the bedside table. It was a personal diary, with the owner's name written in ink on the cover, Private Ivan Petrovich Sokolov, enlisted November 1952. The pages inside were already brittle. When Andre flipped through them, they crackled with the distinct sound of dry paper. He turned to the last few pages and found the final entry. The date was August 15, 1953. The handwriting was hasty, pressed hard into the paper, each stroke nearly tearing through. Today HQ issued an evacuation order. All personnel must withdraw within 3 hours. No one told us why, but today we heard that sound. Everyone heard it. Dmitri said it was a drill penetrating something, but I know it wasn't. That sound had rhythm. It wasn't geological movement. It was alive. Thank God we're leaving this place. I don't want to stay another second. The diary ended there. No signature. No closing. This 20-year-old private named Ivan hadn't had time to finish the last few letters. August 15, 1953, the lieutenant said. His memory had always been the sharpest in our unit. What event corresponds to that date? No one answered, but a random piece of trivia surfaced in my mind, something I'd stumbled across in university before enlisting. On August 12, 1953, the Soviet Union had successfully detonated its first hydrogen bomb at the Semipalatinsk test site, with a yield of 400 kilotons. The first thermonuclear weapon in human history ready for practical use. 3 days later, this top-secret facility 800 meters beneath the Kola Peninsula was completely evacuated. The timeline between these two events was no coincidence. We searched level B3 for about 20 minutes and found the command post. It was a large room at the center of the floor, sealed by a steel blast door that was unlocked. Pushing it open revealed a standard underground command center setup. Rows of communication equipment, a large map covered in military symbols, and a loudspeaker coated in dust. On the wall of the command room, in the most prominent spot, was pinned an organizational chart. It listed all personnel assigned to this facility. In the upper left corner was stamped a dark red top-secret mark and the name of an unfamiliar department. 6th Directorate for Special Research, Council of Ministers of the USSR. In all my years with the GRU, I had come across the code names and structures of nearly every Soviet military and intelligence agency. But I had never heard of this 6th Directorate for Special Research. It didn't belong to the Ministry of Defense, the KGB, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, or even any ministry system I recognized. This department was a complete blank, absent from our intelligence records, our war archives, and any official history this country had ever published. The lieutenant photographed the organizational chart and the department stamp. Then, from a metal cabinet in the command room, he retrieved the only document that hadn't been removed, a leftover research log. It was typed on a typewriter, its pages covered in various levels of top-secret stamps. Most of it was dense with technical jargon and formulas. But on the last page, there was a handwritten note in red ink. At a drilling depth of 780 meters, we penetrated the wall of a cavity composed of an unknown substance. The temperature inside the cavity was 42 degrees Celsius, with abnormally high atmospheric pressure. Upon retrieval, the drill bit carried samples of unidentified biological tissue. Preliminary analysis indicates that the cellular structure of this tissue fundamentally diverges from any known life forms on Earth. Recommend immediate cessation of all drilling operations pending further orders from higher command. The date was September 1951. 2 years before they sealed this facility, they already knew something was down there. The lieutenant sealed the documents in a waterproof bag and made a decision. Abandon the original plan to push deeper into the B4 laboratory level and the B5 main control room. The intelligence we had already gathered was enough to make the situation clear. This facility was not built to defend against external enemies. It was built to study the cavity that had been drilled into and whatever was inside it. More importantly, we now have concrete evidence that, after that chamber was breached, the biological tissue within has spread from an unknown subterranean ecosystem throughout the entire facility over the course of half a century. On B1 level, it was only in the form of mycelium. By B2 level, it had grown into three-dimensional structures. If B2 isn't the deepest level, then we dare not imagine the extent of proliferation on B4 and B5. Our mission is to sanitize and seal, the lieutenant said. Right now, the intelligence data purging part is done. What remains is the sealing. We need to go back to B1, retrieve all the C4 we brought, and systematically demolish the structure from the entrance shaft upward until this facility collapses completely. We agreed to the plan. More accurately, we felt a wave of relief. Then the blast door was struck. The impact came from the direction of B2 level, heavy, violent, brimming with unrestrained brutality. It was nothing like the rhythmic biological pulses we had heard before. This was the sound of something sharp and hard slamming into a metal surface with full force. Blow after blow, each less than half a second apart, the frequency escalating rapidly. Amidst the pounding came the screech of twisting metal. The blast door connecting B2 to B3 was deforming. The quick-dry foam surge had sealed into the door's gaps meant nothing under this kind of assault. "Run!" the lieutenant roared. "Head for the B3 emergency passage. Straight down to B5. There has to be an alternate escape shaft there." We sprinted. For Spetsnaz GRU operators, fully armed and kitted out in full tactical gear, tearing through a half-century-old abandoned underground corridor. The aged rubber flooring crumbled beneath our boots. Cream-colored glazed tiles blurred past on either side. Overhead fluorescent tubes, jarred by our pounding steps, fell behind and shattered at an accelerating rate. I glanced back. The B3 blast door hadn't been breached yet, but the deformation was visible to the naked eye. A bulge had appeared in the center of the half-meter-thick cast-iron door, pushing inward. The bulge was an irregular hemisphere, like a giant fist hammering from the other side, the metal's molecular structure being torn apart millimeter by millimeter. We reached the emergency passage entrance on the east side of B3. It was a narrow, vertical circular shaft with embedded steel rungs along the walls. Markings on the shaft wall indicated the levels: B3, B4, B5. Without hesitation, Andre grabbed the rungs and started descending. We followed one by one, moving fast, the screech of gloves scraping against rusted steel echoing in the confined space. As we descended, I heard the final breach of the B3 blast door. It was a distinct sound of metal tearing, high-density cast iron shattering as a whole, the vibration shaking the entire emergency shaft. Then came the tremors of something massive moving through the B3 corridor, charging toward the emergency passage entrance. Footsteps? No, not footsteps. That thing didn't walk on feet. The vibration was denser, more continuous, like tens of tons of weight being dragged across the floor. Then, above my head, at the entrance to the shaft, a beam of blue-green light shot down. The thing had reached the opening. I don't know why it didn't pursue us directly into the shaft. Maybe the passage was too narrow for its body. Maybe it required specific temperature and humidity conditions, and going further down would take it out of its optimal habitat. Maybe it was just observing. Whatever the reason, it lingered at the opening for a while, the blue-green light flickering above us, mixed with that low-frequency hum that made our internal organs resonate. We hung on the rungs for about 30 seconds, not daring to move. Then the light withdrew. The tremors receded back toward B3. We continued climbing down, and for the entire rest of the descent, no one spoke. The only sounds were our heavy breathing and the hollow clang of combat boots on steel rungs. B4 was the laboratory level. According to the blueprints, it should have been the highest security zone in the entire facility. But we didn't go in. When Andre reached the B4 emergency passage exit, he took one look at the sealed steel door and killed any thought of entering B4. From the door's seams and keyhole, a black, reflective, viscous liquid, resembling crude oil, was seeping out. It oozed slowly from the gaps, flowing down the steel surface. Occasionally, a bubble would form and burst, releasing a pungent, acidic odor. We sprinted past B4, descending straight to the B5 control room. At the end of the emergency corridor lay the entrance to B5, a double-layered, lead-lined blast door, the highest level of protection we'd seen in the entire facility. No guard stood watch. The door was shut, but the lock had been unlatched from within. We pushed it open and stepped into the facility's ultimate secret. The B5 control room was compact, roughly 150 square meters, about the size of an ordinary classroom above ground. But at its center, embedded in the floor, gaped a massive, perfectly smooth, circular opening. The hole measured about 5 meters in diameter, as if a colossal compass had carved an exact circle into the concrete slab. The edges weren't chipped by drill or chisel. The cut was immaculately smooth. Reinforcing bars within the concrete had been severed cleanly, their fractures devoid of burrs or oxidation. Strangest of all, the rim was coated with a translucent, nail-like or cuticle-like substance, sealing the cut as if a biological secretion had congealed into a protective layer. The hole was open from the B5 control room floor, plunging downward into some space beneath the facility. Warm, humid air surged upward in thick waves, temperatures high, humidity near saturation. The current carried that cloying, sweet, metallic stench that pervaded the entire facility, but here the concentration was suffocating, so dense it felt like liquid flooding my lungs. Even through my tactical mask, tears streamed from my eyes. Andre aimed his flashlight into the hole. The beam dissolved into mist less than 20 meters down, revealing nothing. Yet a faint, blue-green luminescence seeped up from the depths, as dim as bioluminescence seen through deep seawater. The lieutenant found what we needed last: a handwritten final report, sealed in a plastic bag, pinned to a dossier on the control room wall. The dossier's cover bore a single line: Koltsovo 12 Final Assessment Report, August 15th, 1953, 23:47. Top secret. Ultimate classification. Burn after reading. The lieutenant tore it open and began scanning. We stood guard. He flipped page after page, his expression shifting from professional composure to something close to awe. After about 5 minutes, he tucked the documents into a waterproof pouch. When he turned to us, I noticed his hands trembling. The report says, the lieutenant's voice was low but clear in the dead silence of the control room. The drilling in 1951 didn't breach a chamber. It broke into a closed, independent ecosystem sealed off from the surface biosphere. Carbon isotope dating places the rock layer containing that ecosystem at least 200 million years old. 200 million years. After the breach, microorganisms from that chamber immediately contaminated the entire lower facility. They spent 2 years trying to contain it, every method. High heat, strong acids, radiation, even detonating a small tactical nuclear device in a test zone. All failed. On August 15, 1953, they issued their final assessment. One sentence. The lieutenant paused. This biota exhibits high adaptability, intelligent swarm behavior, and uncontrollable reproductive capabilities. The facility is beyond salvage. Immediate evacuation of all personnel is advised. The entire facility is to be inspected and filled with specially formulated concrete. All personnel involved must sign a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. That's what they recommended, and that's what they did. The dossier recorded the full evacuation. All 147 personnel left within 3 hours. Then 15,000 tons of high-density cement were poured down the surface shaft. After the cement column set, every passage to the outside was sealed. For the next 45 years, this facility vanished from the earth. But now, as I stood on the control room floor, warm air surged from the hole beneath my feet. The cement poured in 1953 had, at some unknown point, been completely dissolved from below by some force. Then the light in the hole flared. The blue-green glow intensified tenfold in an instant, flooding the entire B-5 control room as if we were submerged in deep ocean. Instinctively, we all raised our weapons toward the opening. In that blazing light, I saw it, about 30 meters down the shaft. That pale, moist, immense surface we glimpsed in B2 was rising, slowly, heavily, inexorably upward. The lieutenant zipped up the waterproof bag and said, in the calmest yet most despairing tone I've ever heard in my life, "Job's done. Now figure out how to get out alive." We didn't retrace our steps. B3 level had already been breached by that thing, and going back through that emergency corridor would have been suicide. The lieutenant found another route in the southeast corner of the main control room, an emergency escape shaft not marked on any original blueprints, leading to a surface exit not at the cola drilling site, but at an abandoned military radar station about 2 kilometers away. This was the last resort escape route reserved for the facility's highest-ranking personnel. No one had ever used it before us. The escape shaft was much narrower than the path we'd taken down, barely 2 meters in diameter, more like a ventilation duct or drainage pipe. The walls were lined with ancient iron rungs, their spacing uneven, as if hastily welded together. The shaft's interior was coated with the same black fibers as the facility, but due to the lower temperature here, they lay dormant, pressed against the walls with no signs of active movement. Now, our only hope rested on this vertical pipe less than a meter wide. The 4 of us began climbing upward at full speed. At that moment, every hierarchy and tactical discipline we built over our entire careers on the surface lost all practical meaning. No one cared about formation. No one cared about watch sectors. We were just climbing for our lives, rung after rung after rung, our boots screeching against the trembling iron ladder with a metallic groan like a death knell. After I'd climbed roughly 400 meters vertically, I finally heard the sound of airflow from above. It was the surface wind, funneling down through the shaft's opening. Though laced with dust and rust, that cold, dry air, carrying the scent of the polar tundra, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever smelled in my life. Andre was the first to reach the top. He slammed his shoulder against the iron hatch, forcing it open, and a beam of gray-white daylight poured into the shaft. Even the dim winter light of the Arctic Circle, to us who'd been steeped in underground darkness for hours, felt like 10,000 suns. We crawled out of the shaft one by one. The outside world was exactly as I remembered: gray sky, distant horizon, withered grass bent flat by the wind, and the low hills characteristic of the Kola Peninsula in the distance. The rotor blades of a helicopter hummed faintly, Sasha and Igor following the emergency protocol after we lost contact. had called in an evacuation chopper. I dropped to my knees on the frozen ground, tore off my tactical mask, and inhaled deeply the -5-degree air. My lungs were filled with that sweet, cloying stench. I needed the cleanest Arctic wind to purge that taste from every single alveolus. The first thing we did after getting out was destroy the escape shaft. Andre set up a directional blast with the last 2 blocks of C4, collapsing the upper half of the shaft entirely. Rubble and frozen earth filled about 50 meters of depth. Whether that would be enough to stop those things, I don't know. We could only pray it was. On the way to the extraction point, the lieutenant made a brief oral report to command via satellite phone. I never learned the specifics of that report, but less than an hour after we boarded the helicopter, I saw through the window what was happening at the Kola drilling site. The ground was collapsing. Not a natural sinkhole, but a massive, nearly perfect circular area sinking simultaneously, as if the space 800 meters below had been hollowed out of its support, collapsing layer by layer upward from the B5 main control room. The entire collapse lasted about 15 minutes, finally forming a giant pit over 200 meters in diameter. That collapse pit remained a silent scar on the tundra for the next 26 years. No one filled it. No one explained it. The official story was a cave-in caused by abandoned drilling operations. No report ever mentioned that facility, those black fibers, or the final assessment report we brought out of the B5 main control room. Nor did any report explain why the collapse of a drilling cavity would leave a crater with edges coated in vitrified material. As for that vitrified material on that level, it was soil and rock that had melted under extreme heat and then resolidified. A cave-in doesn't generate that kind of temperature. 26 years have passed. I often jolt awake in the dead of night, dreaming of that blast door bulging into a hemispherical dome before my eyes, dreaming of the pulsing frequency of those blue-green lights, and the last words Sergei said to me as he climbed upward. He was about 3 rungs below me when he suddenly stopped what he was doing and muttered out of nowhere, "Victor, that thing in the hole, it's not chasing us." At the time, I thought he was raving, a mind unhinged by sheer terror. But over the years, I've turned those words over and over in my mind countless times. It's not chasing us. What Sergei meant was that it was moving toward shallower strata. Whatever that thing was, whatever that ecosystem sealed for 200 million years inside that chamber was, its behavioral pattern over half a century wasn't about staying put or defending. It was about expanding upward. Filament by filament, fiber by fiber, from one chamber to one facility, from one facility to the surrounding rock layers, it pushed upward inch by inch, piercing granite, eroding reinforced concrete, climbing 800 vertical meters in 50 years. It wasn't chasing us. It was always moving upward. Before the lieutenant died, he said that thing was still there. Now I'm telling you those words. Beneath the permafrost of the Kola Peninsula lie dozens of abandoned Soviet military installations, most scattered across desolate wastelands far from human habitation. No surveillance, no patrols, no one would ever bother to trek out there to inspect a rust-shut blast door. But there's an entire subterranean world down there, and after a 200 million year isolation was shattered by a single drill bore, it's seeping into humanity's old ruins in ways we cannot comprehend. That collapsed crater is still there, the glassified walls retaining an anomalous heat to this day. If you take a surface thermometer to it, you'll see the pit's bottom is more than 10 degrees Celsius hotter than the surrounding permafrost. In the Arctic winter at -40 degrees, that crater never freezes. This may only be the beginning. I don't know what we awakened 800 meters underground. I don't know what that thing will do next. But one thing I'm certain of, when the 1953 crew evacuated, they thought they'd sealed the facility. When we went in during 1998, we thought we'd blown it to rubble. But neither of us sealed it. Still moving upward. One day it will reach the surface.